Okay, I see people are coming in. Welcome, everyone. Today's session, Josie is going to talk around digitalization to build a learning organization and talk about developing building blocks. Our rules, as you know, are the same as before. Your microphones will be muted, as will be your videos. But please, as you know, this is intended to be an interactive session, conversation. And Josie would really appreciate that when you have questions or comments that you raise them, but please do that in the chat box. I will monitor what's happening. I'll monitor the chat box, and then I'll bring whatever you've got to say, any comment or any question you've got to Josie when it seems like a useful time to interrupt her. So those are the rules. We will finish by 10 as ever. And I'm going to hand over to Josie, who will share her screen and take us through what she's got to say. Josie, do you want to share your screen and then take it on?
Sure. Just tell me if
14 people who've joined us so far.
Okay. Can you see that?
It's coming up now. Yes, and it's in presentation mode, so you're good.
All right. So am I good to go?
You are good to go.
All right. A very good morning to everyone, and it's lovely to be here. As Andy indicated, the topic today that I've chosen is to look at towards digitalization, to build a learning organization, and really to look at some of the building blocks of how to get there. And I think the reason why I chose this topic, you know, is that it's not, I think, you know, a yes or no answer that we, you know, we have to wait for a certain time. We have to think about how do we get there? And, you know, in light of all our challenges at the moment in the country with Eskom and, you know, load shedding, it presents many challenges, but we can't, you know, hold that against the process. And recently I was in Singapore, and, you know, what I learned there is that it took them 40 years to where they are today. So I think for me, it's about taking that first step. And what is that first step? And one of the questions I want to pose to you is to think and reflect on where are you in the process of your transition towards digitalization in your organization, and where are you in your process around thinking about a learning organization. So I just want to move to the next slide. Andy, I'm not sure if it's moving. I'm pressing my arrows at the moment, so it's not
yet.
It's not allowing me to move in my arrows.
It should do the same as.
There we go. There's the content. So there are sort of three broad areas that I'd like us to look at today and to reflect on. Terminology is very, very critical. So I want to look at 4 key terms, in particular, digitization versus digitalization, and then looking at an organizational learning culture versus what is a learning organization. Then to explore some of the building blocks in those processes, and then to reflect on change management processes and some of the lessons that we've learned to date in our transitions that we may find ourselves in. So if we think about digitization, you know, a lot of us, you know, have, you know, in our own organizations, we can think, what if we, you know, converted information into digital format? It seems a simple process, yet we haven't fulfilled all of that process across the country. You can think about your municipality and think about how do you make payments. You can think about submitting forms online. For example, with our the discretionary grant process and how we, upload, but yet we don't have a process within our own organization where we're submitting the information for discretionary grants on a digital format. We're still completing forms and uploading. So when it comes to digitalization, we have to look at technologies of how we're changing our business model. So we're not there yet in some of our own processes. If I can think about the local government CETA, in terms of submitting forms to complete for the discretionary grant process. So it requires a transition. And I think what I learned most when I went to Singapore towards the end of August, we went to study at the Singapore Public Academy, was that what underpinned a lot of their learning and process of how they've achieved, digitalization, is it is underpinned by a learning culture. And when we think about a learning culture is within an organizational culture. But what distinguishes it? It's all about the learning processes. And we have, I've put down a broad kind of definition there, but we have lots of competing beliefs and values within our organizational culture, as well as within the learning culture. If you think about your organization with different units, different departments, there are different leadership styles, different management practices, but there's a process of learning. And it's about, how are those processes and practices embedded in the work, in the organizational work that you do, that guides your behavior, that guides your actions, that even guides your work ethic. And here I put down work learning ethic, because you can have a work ethic, but what about a work learning ethic? Remember, we are, all of us should be thinking about lifelong learning and continuous learning. And with regards to thinking about a learning organization, the question that I pose to you is, are we there yet? In terms of thinking about, how do we utilize organizational learning processes to influence the work we do as a whole organization, to reflect new knowledge, to reflect different ways of doing things. So for me, it's about how do we integrate and embed the learning in the organization. And for me, it's a continual process in terms of how organizations transform themselves. And it's part of the vision and the mission. So for me, it's always a continual work in progress. So for me, these are important terminologies and thinking about
Josie, before you go from that slide, though, there's a couple of thoughts that occurred to me as I look at it. One is, I think the question is, we kind of have a picture of where we want it to go. Ideally, we want to be in a place where the information is embedded in a system, which makes it, you can work with it. And we're working within organizations that are learning organizations.
Yes.
But the steps between here and there are often a challenge.
Yeah.
And what I found interesting about our earlier conversations around that is that you can start, you don't have to go for broke immediately. You can start with stuff that will move you in that direction. And therefore, that is for me quite interesting, is to think about what can we do, even if it's a long road, where can we start? Are there some easy wins?
Yeah, you want me to kind of think?
Pick it up as you fancy. It's just a comment.
Yeah, so the thing is, for me, strategy is always critical. All of us must have an organizational strategy. And I'm going to get to the slide around talking about a digital strategy that needs to be aligned to your organizational strategy. And why that becomes important is that it impacts on your talent management recruitment process, and as well as your human resource development processes as well, in terms of ensuring that your employees, are brought up to speed, or, that possibly thinking about changing work roles. One thing I want to just bring to everyone's attention is that Singapore didn't lose any people. You know, there wasn't high unemployment. They only have 2% unemployment at the moment compared to our high, you know, unemployment rate. So what they ensured was that, you know, they looked at the job profiles that needed to be changed, and they had to retrain. And the other thing is to upskill employees. So that becomes important. I think the other thing that I would always say is that your standard operating procedures become critical in thinking about your processes and what you can do if you haven't digitize processes, because that then helps you to take those small steps. And I think, you know, change is about taking those small steps. I think the other thing is around, you know, everything should be seen as a learning process and maybe an improvement process. So, you know, that reflection on how to make those changes become critical, so that we see this as a journey in progress rather than an event. So for me, I think the other thing that I would just highlight is that when you allow the time for reflection as part of that learning process, it also allows for greater innovation and creativity. If you're overburdened with too many things to do, you don't have time to reflect, or you don't make time to reflect, and those innovation and creativity moments just don't happen. So those are just some thoughts, I think, Andy, you know, that come to mind at the moment.
Thanks, Josie.
Yeah. So I can continue. In terms of the next slide, I just wanted to highlight the building blocks to consider. So I've highlighted organizational learning culture. I think for me, when I went to Singapore, you know, it came out time and time again around learning, the learning process, and the learning culture underpinned the process towards digitalization. So for me, I think, you know, we need to reflect on how we bring that learning culture within the organization. And I've also indicated, I call it a PMI, an improvement model. I know it's often referred to as plan, act, do, check, or something like that, but I find it easier to say plan, implement, monitor, improve, so that your ways of working, these small transitions are always shaped and informed by learning. And I think the second thing is around an organizational strategy. And what I want to highlight to colleagues and to members joining today is the terminology around a strategic human resource management strategy, as well as a strategic human resource development strategy. So HRD is a component of HRM, and these become fundamental and have to be aligned to organizational strategy. And this is important for the types of people and employees that are required, you know, to take these processes forward within the work environment. And the third one that I've put down, you know, it's either learning and development or training and development, but I feel we need to push learning more to the forefront. So I've called it learning, training, and development. So we need to think a lot around our work and our work processes and our work relationships. And we need to think about the implications, I've said, for digital skills. I've put 4IR, but some will say, no, we've passed 4IR, we're in 5IR or 6IR, whatever, it doesn't matter. We need to just think about the opportunities that present on a day-to-day basis. And we need to build that PNI, the plan, implement, monitor, improve, in the way that we work, so that we can have this learning culture and high performance culture towards achieving you know, the transition from digitization to digitalization. The other thing that I've just said that, you know, sorry, COVID, yes.
You're 14 minutes in.
Yes, okay. The other thing just to bear in mind, you know, COVID presented us with great opportunities. So flexible blended learning programs and interventions become critical for how, you know, we can provide opportunities, you know, within the workplace or within workspaces, but bearing in mind that we mustn't put all our eggs in one basket and have just focus on the formal. We need to look and utilize informal, non-formal learning opportunities as well. The other thing in terms of a building block is that, you know, I think COVID also taught us we're not an island. We're interconnected at different layers, different levels with the world. So thinking about collaboration opportunities and learning opportunities with other partners become critical. And we need to look at those strategic partnerships in line with our strategy. So I've put down things for reflection around digital agreements and cooperation to help us in that transition, capacity building opportunities, and really making sure that no one is left behind in terms of ensuring all of us are taking digital readiness seriously in our practices and our processes and with our employees. And I think just to highlight in terms of the strategy, whether you're aware or not, the Department of Telecommunications, and at the time it was Telecommunications and Postal Services, they promulgated the National Digital and Future Skills Strategy. And whether you're in the private environment or sector, I think it's important, you know, it's not just about, you know, public versus private. Singapore had a national blueprint towards their digitalization process, and that affects each and every one, whether it's business, public, private, no matter what age. The second report that I think is important, we had a ministerial task team on 4IR that looked at the implications of the post-school education and training system. I think these things, we need these documents to help inform our strategy and to reflect. And I just put down some implications around thinking about this. You know, what stops us from thinking about smart industries and smart organizations? How are we going to get there? What is our roadmap? At the moment, we need to think critically about cybersecurity, having policies and processes in place to prevent such cyber attacks. We have to put change management on the agenda, but part of that process is making sure that we bring everyone along. So it's set, the tone is set at the top by leadership. We need to make sure that we bring employees together in the process, and attitude, a mindset, commitment and buy-in become critical components. We live in, I think, a chaotic world, if I can call it. There's lots of disruptions, but we can use these as opportunities, hence why the change, the type of leadership that's required. So we need to ensure synergy. Coordination is big time. I think it's one of the fundamental things that you know, when all of these processes are integrated, so it requires good coordination at different levels within the organization, but within the country and across sectors, within sectors. Yeah, and collaboration as well as communication. The learning culture, as I indicated, we need to think about the service delivery journey. We need to think about, you know, how, not only from an internal perspective, but an external perspective around, you know, clients or residents or citizens, whatever layer. And then within the context, as I indicated, the workplace learning, thinking about structures. How are structures going to change in terms of the type of occupations, the type of jobs that are required? Relationships become very, very critical. So within a learning culture, it's not about silos, it's about building relationships. I've indicated learning and development. I've indicated about strategic human resource management together with strategic human resource development. And with that, we need champions and leaders at different levels within the organization. Start small, build it up, but it must be led from the top. Then we need to think about the type of digital skills required so that, as I indicated, we don't leave employees or people behind. And we need to think about, you know, the skills revolution. When are we going to arrive? You know, in terms of the Skills Development Act, a long time ago, if you remember, it indicated that every employer must create learning spaces. So thinking about training, but what about learning spaces? And as I indicated, we need the skills. I think the skills are still there, but we need to become more agile. We need to become responsive. We need to think about making time for creativity. The thing about problem-solving skills is that with digitalization, it's dealing with more complex skills. So we need to create opportunities to prepare learners. So thinking about curriculum. And I put down intergenerational needs, abilities, and capabilities. So, you know, what I mean there is thinking about within the context of the workplace or even the learning opportunities, how do we utilize one another to learn from one another, but thinking about the needs at the different levels. We talk about Generation X, talk about Generation Y, the baby boomers, you know, so how do we need one another. It's not about one or the other, we need one another. And with capabilities, remember, we're moving towards competency frameworks. What does it mean? I put down partnerships in the role of professional bodies such as the ASDSA. What can we do? And just the last thing, just thinking around the strategy, thinking about the before, during, and after phases, thinking about what do we need to do to promote and support. Remember, it's led by leadership, management, and all employees. There must be that buy-in. Thinking about different ways of working and learning, the role of mentors and coaches, peer learning, informal, non-formal, competency frameworks, the after processes. We need to remember maintenance and sustainability, and return on investment opportunities. I think the last things that I just want to share with you, I'm not sure what the time frame is. I mean, what? How many?
10 minutes. 10.
10, okay. So some lessons to consider. I just put this down. It's in no particular order, but thinking about what processes of change and learning we've come from through different experiences and workplaces and workspaces and learning spaces. And, you know, so mindset for me becomes critical. As I indicated, you know, we've got to have the attitude, we've got to have the will, we've got to have commitment if we want to make change. But that also begins with us individually. So within an organization transition towards any change, it begins with us as the individual first, moving in coherence with the organizational strategy. Thinking about avoiding duplication, that is key. So that's why the standard operating procedures become important, to look at processes, to look at relationships between different departments, to look at the complexity. You know, when you go to Singapore, you think, wow, everything's working, it's fantastic, it feels safe, you know, but behind the scenes, it looks very simple. I mean, it looks simple on the outset, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of integration of things. And that takes time. Remember, they had a 40-year journey to get where they are. They started with a single step and they had the vision, but they also took along their culture. And that's why it's important that we see this as a process and a journey. We need to think about, as I indicated, the understanding the journey, the service journey, or how do you develop a product, for example, and thinking about, you know, what does that mean in terms of digitization or digitalization? We need to think about competencies, and thinking about competencies within the context of occupations, in terms of the skills, attitudes, values, the capabilities that is required, and the impact of that on training. Quality is important. We need to think, you know, often we say, you know, we've got great policy, but, you know, we don't have great doers. We need to think about more action. And I think the other thing is, you know, what made Singapore also get to where it is today is having a national identity. And how do we achieve that? We need to be focusing in one direction. So small steps towards automation, moving, transitioning from digitization to digitalization, so that we see the transformation, thinking about process and how we build the technology into the ways of working. I've just said we must build, we must run, we must operate, we must govern, we must scale. We must see this as a blueprint, and where do we start? So but we must see also the vision and where we want to move towards. And hence why the learning organization for me is something we aspire towards. But along the way, how are we going to get there? We need the learning culture, we need the strategies, we need the talent management, we need the leadership, we need the management, we need the coherence. And we need the consistency to be able to achieve that. I've said product success culture, so focusing on the delivery, the journey of the service, both internal and external. So it's not just about transforming with thinking about within, thinking about external, thinking about success. Which will lead to the sustainability. So the quality of the relationships, the collaborations, the quality of collective thinking, breaking down silos, the quality of actions, the quality of reskilling. You know, we talk about service delivery within the local government sector in which I'm in. You know, in the Constitution, it talks about effective, efficient, and economical service delivery. What about the quality of service delivery? Making decisions. And I think making decisions, we need the data, we need the research, we need information to make informed decisions. And I think that, you know, I've said here, it's a journey of progress, not perfection. And what I would like to end with, we're striving to, that quality is about striving towards excellence. So it's not the perfection, it's about a journey, striving, learning along the way, working and learning together towards excellence. So I think those are some of the things, and I'm not sure if there are any questions. I was just conscious of time because, you know, I can talk, so I was trying to just make sure. But Andy, is there anything coming from any questions?
Not as such, but certainly some of the things that have struck me is on the one hand, we're talking about people needing people to be creative and unlocking potential there. On the other hand, we're talking about standard operating procedures. We're also talking about, I think we've all grown up in a society where, where you often get told what to do and how to do it.
Yes.
Which stifles a learning culture. So I'm left with the thought that this is not an easy transition into a learning culture.
No. And I think the other thing is around making mistakes. You know, it's not like we, you know, deliberately make mistakes in the work. We don't come to work to make mistakes. But the thing is, if mistakes are made, we need to learn from them. I think, you know, one of the things that comes to mind is that, you know, from an audit perspective, you know, each and every year as public entities, we're audited. But we, you know, when the auditor comes the next year, that if we have audit findings, for example, we should have reduced those audit findings. But I know sometimes with the municipality audits, you know, the Auditor General saying, no, but it's the same audit findings coming up time and time again. So that's where the issue of a learning culture comes in, because from an audit, it's based on your policies, it's based on your standard operating procedures. So it's what we do within the context of our work that we're audited against. So we should be building in, but if there are mistakes, or if they're at the end of the process, you know, we need to take time to reflect. Hence why I indicated around the PIMI, the plan, implement, monitor, and improve. It's an improvement model which can be applied on a day-to-day basis in anything we do. So, you know, thinking about what we do, how we do it. I think often because of the technological world we work in, we're so used to sending emails and, you know, instructions or whatever, but we need to sometimes make it more human. I think, you know, we need to, you know, begin. And that's why relationships become important in this process, so that, you know, and that's often with the digitalization process, we need to remember the soft skills become important, because those can't become digitalized. So the soft human skills, we mustn't lose essence of that. It's about putting the processes of the work, and hence why standard operating procedures become so critical, because any system cannot be as good as you understand the process. You know, you can't build a system without having thought how you do it. Hence why standard operating procedures for me become fundamental in thinking about the processes, whether it's from an internal perspective from the organization, hence the journey from the outside. We also, so having those, you know, customer surveys or whatever to think and reflect on, you know, what is working, what is not working. Having conversations, but having strategic conversations, ensuring alignment between strategy, human resources, and between, you know, how are we going to achieve? And those conversations require also some freedom, I should say, within the culture. You know, and often in a public sector environment, it's very regulated. But what I know that in Singapore, they create spaces and opportunities for this innovation to share within the private sector, so that then, you know, they create, you know, projects of sharing, which is really fascinating and amazing. So yeah.
Certainly my own experience when acting as a training provider, the process of digitalizing what we were doing was, it needed to be a step-by-step thing. We needed to have a really clear idea of what the procedure was. And so all that process mapping, I was involved in process mapping in the 90s. Now that all comes to the fore. You need to know where you're going. And it starts, you think about what bits of it can become digitalized. And you really cannot do that from on high. You need to be doing it with the people who do the work for it to. Josie, we're on 10 o'clock.
Wow.
I've been chatting. Are there any comments? There's a comment from Andrea some while ago. Just have to agree. Andrea, I'm not sure what you were referring to. Has anybody else very quickly got any final comments or questions for Josie? Felicity saying, sorry, you need to run. We're on 10. If you could, yes. And see, Angelique has put in the link for CPD points in the chat box, so please use that. Any final comments? Sharon saying, excellent presentation. Michael Tiger, very informative. So some nice feedback, but please get your CPD points if you need. Josie, I think we are done. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you very much. And I'm glad that it could finally happen. You know, I know last time I wasn't well, so I'm very grateful for the opportunity. So thank you very much. And I think this is a, can I just say that this should be a beginning of a conversation. This is not, I think it's something that needs to happen within the context of this topic. Yeah. And maybe that's something, yeah.
I mean, we're thrust into it as a society. That's, and certainly from all the changes in learning technology and the expectations of learners as to what that learning experience is going to be, we have to go there. There's no choice.
Yeah. And I just remembered now, Andy, that when I left Singapore to go through, you know, the customs, it was all done electronically. There were no people. There were only you go through and you show your passport and you have to, you know, show your face, but there was no interaction with people. So, you know, that is something moving forward. So you need to always remember that even living in a digitalized world, at the end of the day, you still have to come back to your soul and your senses, which is nature. So when I came home, I went straight to the Kruger Park. So you can have all the technology in the world, but we must remember as South Africa, we're also blessed. So despite not having electricity, we have vast, beautiful spaces of nature. And that helps to refresh the soul and the senses. So I should have ended on that point. I just thought about it now.
Listen, do yourself a favor. Have a look at the comments in the chat box. Some very nice, very nice
feedback. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I wasn't doing that. Okay, that's great, Andy. Thanks so much. I really appreciate the professional body as well.
Thank you, everybody. We've got one more conversations this year coming up where Sharon is going to give us a quick review of all that's happened in the year for the ASDSA. And we'll start talking about, in fact, conversations next year. We're already starting to plan that, so look out for that. Thanks, everybody. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone. Bye.